Tomorrow at noon Eastern, the 119th session of Congress begins. The first question before the newly elected Congress is going to be, will Mike Johnson be the Speaker of the House? Basically, if any two Republicans vote against him, he loses. Now, I understand math a little bit, but this seems like more than one.
He can only afford to lose one Republican vote. Republican Congressman Thomas Massie has already said he won't be backing Johnson.
Why are you not committed to Speaker Johnson as the next Speaker of the House?
Well, I'll tell you, Will, I look at people's track record, and unfortunately, we will not be able to deliver on President Trump's agenda, as the same happened in 2016, because it has to be done legislatively if we don't have a Speaker with the courage, vision, and a plan.
I remain undecided, as do a number of my colleagues, because we solved so many of the failures last year. Right now, I don't believe that he has the votes on Friday.
Remember that nothing can be done in the new Congress until a speaker is chosen. It cannot swear in new members. It cannot form committees. It cannot pass legislation. It cannot certify Donald Trump's election victory. Electing a Speaker of the House on day one is supposed to be a formality. It's not supposed to be hard. So this fight over the speaker's gavel doesn't bode well for the ability of this incoming Congress to actually govern. Joining us now is the Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas. Congresswoman, good to see you. Thank you for being with us again. This begs a question for Democrats who tend to be pretty disciplined about this stuff. Certainly the last time around, every time Kevin McCarthy was trying to get an election, everybody voted for Hakeem Jeffries on the Democratic side. Obviously, that's going to happen as well tomorrow. But at what point do Democrats feel any responsibility or compulsion to get involved and say, all right, at some point, the work of the people has to get done, and you all aren't doing it?
In my opinion, that point will not be reached. Listen, they have gone around, they have talked about how there is a mandate and that this country issued a mandate for the Republicans to run something. Well, the country about to find out. We are in the find out phase. So go ahead and run whatever y'all gonna run. But listen, if it's all about y'all, if you don't believe in bipartisanship and you have a Trump trifecta, then y'all work this out amongst yourselves. We're gonna sit on the sidelines and eat our popcorn.
And as you're eating that popcorn, because tomorrow could be a long day, maybe they'll get it worked out soon, maybe they won't. What does that look like to you? What does success look like to you? Because there is the business of governing that has to get done. They got to get a speaker so that they can get various things done, including January 6th, the certification of the election of the president, the vice president. What are you looking to see happen tomorrow? What are you most interested in?
Honestly, I'm not that concerned about January 6th. I know you just threw that in there, but my candidate didn't win. So, if it gets delayed, I'm okay with that. But what I am interested in seeing is how savvy his right flank will be if they actually will go ahead and extract blood the same way that they extracted out of McCarthy, right? That's how we got back to putting Chip Roy on rules along with a few other people that have blown things up and made it very difficult for any speaker to actually conduct their business. They've had to take up things such as these continuing resolutions on suspension instead of actually taking them through rules because they couldn't get the rules passed. In addition to that, I'm curious to see if they get him back down to that one speaker vote, right, to vacate the speaker. Right now in the proposed rules, it's going to take a lot of people, and they have to come from the Republican side, which is very interesting. We have never seen that. Not that the Democrats have ever moved to vacate the speaker anyway. He's always been, or their speaker has always been vacated by someone on their side. But I think that they are going to extract a little bit of blood out of Mike Johnson if he is going to become speaker again. But they really don't have anybody else. So this is really a matter of who can hold out the longest. But considering the fact that Trump went crawling to Chip Roy today in a phone call, I just think that it's funny because, MAGA believes that Trump is this big, mean guy and he's the strong man. But here it is. He has threatened Chip Roy not once, not twice, but he's threatened him a number of times. And Chip Roy always stands up to him. Yeah. And now it's Trump that's calling Chip Roy begging for a vote.
Yeah, it's interesting because Chip Roy, Trump's already used the "I'll primary you" thing on Chip Roy. Chip Roy tends to beat everybody who runs against him. He made the point the other day that if Trump goes against him and he loses 30 points, still wins the primary and still wins the election. So it is interesting to see how that all goes down. There are a couple things coming up. The continuing resolution that does have to be dealt with. That's March. That's about 96 news cycles away. There is the issue of the debt ceiling, which Donald Trump has flip-flopped on in the past, but now he wants something done with it. What are the priorities as Democrats that you're looking at? What are the things that you'd like to see done in this Congress that your participation can help get done?
So I absolutely want to make sure that this is done in a bipartisan way. I don't think that Mike Johnson will ever be able to guarantee his entire caucus. He wasn't able to do it when he had a larger majority. And so what does bipartisanship look like? It looks like making sure that the priorities that the Democrats have, which are really the priorities of everyday working folk, making sure that we've got, obviously there was the fight about the funding for child cancer research, making sure that we're protecting Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, making sure that we're doing the smart things that will take care of Americans is what we want to do. What we're not looking forward to is them trying to ram through the Trump tax scam again. Those tax cuts, they expire in 2025. And so that's why he wanted to make sure that debt ceiling was raised. And so this is where we will be able to use our leverage, knowing that they only have a 2-seat majority when it comes down to it, which means that they will only be allowed to lose one vote on anything that they want to pass through the House.
Are there circumstances you can see in which Mike Johnson reaches over to Hakeem Jeffries and says there are things that have to get done? We did see that a little bit in the last House. You don't see much of that going on this time?
I mean, he may reach, but let me tell you, he gonna feel these reaches, because when he allowed Elon Musk and Vivek to jump onto social media and blow up what had been, days and months long negotiations between Democrats and Republicans, and you allow a tweet to blow it all up. Well, first of all, the only currency that we have when we are lawmakers, whether it's the state or federal level, is our word. And so if you will not honor your word because somebody randomly who's not elected sends out a tweet, that's no way to govern, and we can't trust you. It was the same issue that McCarthy had. Democrats couldn't trust him, nor could his own party trust him, and so therefore he got kicked out. I think Mike Johnson is in a real big pickle. I think if he had actually just went ahead, pushed forward with the CR as it had been negotiated, then he would be in a position to say, hey, Hakeem, if I got a problem, can you help me out? But he's not in that position right now.
First, there was Timothy McVeigh, an American military veteran who killed 168 people, including 19 children, in a terrorist attack on a federal building in Oklahoma City. Timothy McVeigh parked a truck outside that building loaded with explosives in an act of homegrown American terrorism. Timothy McVeigh's hatred of the American government was not tamed in any way by his service in the American military. So, too, with America's latest terrorist attack in New Orleans on New Year's Eve, with an American military veteran driving a pickup truck through a crowd to murder 14 people. The American military veteran terrorist was then killed in an exchange of gunfire with police. But when Donald Trump sees the type of terrorist attack that occurred in New Orleans, he doesn't remember Timothy McVeigh, and instead he blames the criminals that he imagines are crossing the southern border. Hours after the attack in New Orleans, Donald Trump wrote, quote, "When I said that the criminals coming in are far worse than the criminals we have in our country, that statement was constantly refuted by Democrats and the fake news media, but it turned out to be true." No one who has ever crossed the southern border in the history of the existence of the southern border has killed more people in this country than Timothy McVeigh, who was born in Lockport, New York, the northwest part of the state, into a white Roman Catholic American family with roots in this country that go back farther than Donald Trump's roots in this country. The New Orleans terrorist, like Timothy McVeigh, reached the rank of sergeant in the United States Army. The simple fact is this country has suffered more deadly terrorism at the hands of American-born citizens who are veterans of the United States military than people who have crossed into this country at the southern border. It is very clear from the evidence that if you want to worry about terrorism in this country, the United States Army is a much bigger problem than the southern border. No one who crossed the southern border attacked the Capitol on January 6th, 4 years ago. But several veterans of the United States military violently attacked the Capitol on January 6th in an act of terrorism intended to terrorize Congress into violating the Constitution and not certifying Joe Biden as the elected president of the United States. With the country reeling from the attack in New Orleans, and those of us with family and friends in New Orleans worried about their safety, the big players in Donald Trump's world were not talking about New Orleans. They were talking about visas. Former Trump staff member Steve Bannon got in a public argument on Twitter with the owner of Twitter, Elon Musk, that provoked Musk to call Trump supporters like Bannon, quote, unrepentant racists. Musk seemed surprised to discover that there were any racists supporting Donald Trump. Remember the outrage in both the news media and Trump world 8 years ago when candidate for president Hillary Clinton referred to some Trump supporters as, quote, deplorables, the racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it. Donald Trump pretended to be deeply offended at Hillary Clinton's accurate description of some Trump supporters. When the richest person Donald Trump has ever met, who also happens to be the richest person in the world, calls Trump voters unrepentant racists, Donald Trump, of course, sided with the rich guy against his own supporters. Donald Trump decided to publicly agree with Elon Musk that we should admit more skilled immigrants into this country, even to take jobs that Americans are eager to do. Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman writes in his Substack article titled, MAGA is already eating its own, pass the popcorn, quote, like many observers, I expected severe buyer's regret fairly early in the second Trump administration. After all, many Americans who voted for Trump did so because they believed he would bring down grocery prices. He was never going to be able to deliver on that promise and stopped talking about the subject as soon as the election was over. Sooner or later, voters were going to notice. I did not, however, expect a mega civil war weeks before Trump had even taken office. Elon Musk threatened Trump supporters like Steve Bannon on Twitter, saying, quote, take a big step back and F yourself in the face. I will go to war on this issue, the likes of which you cannot possibly comprehend. Vivek Ramaswamy joined the Musk side of the argument by saying that American workers are just not as good as foreign workers. American workers are mediocre. Ramaswamy said, quote, American culture has venerated mediocrity over excellence for way too long. Imagine if Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or any Democrat anywhere ever said that American workers are mediocre. American workers are not as good as foreign workers. And that, quote, American culture has venerated mediocrity. Paul Krugman writes, quote, so where is Trump coming down on all this? It has always been clear that he shares the tech bros' contempt for ordinary Americans, but is he willing to openly sell out his MAGA base? Why, yes. After Elon Musk told Trump loyalists to F themselves in the face, Trump sided with Musk. The terrorist attack in New Orleans brings into sharp focus what is at stake in the Senate confirmation hearing of Donald Trump's choice for director of the FBI. The confirmation hearing for Kash Patel as director of the FBI will be held in the Senate Judiciary Committee with our first guest tonight, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, asking questions of the nominee, who has publicly said he wants to eliminate the intelligence unit in the FBI that investigates terrorist plots and has successfully stopped many of those plots before they were carried out. Here is what Kash Patel said he wants to do with that unit of the FBI and with the rest of the FBI.
The FBI's footprint has gotten so freaking big, and the biggest problem the FBI has come out of its intel shops. I'd break that component out of it. I'd shut down the FBI Hoover building on day one and reopening it the next day as a museum of the deep state.
There has been pretty serious, pretty intense conversation on that terrible killing of the United Health CEO, Brian Thompson, ever since the day it happened. Now, Luigi Mangione has pled not guilty to 11 charges. That's the update in that court process as of last week. He faces murder and terrorism charges. But the case, and separate from the actual sort of calls for vigilante-style attacks on people, the case itself has really brought to the fore much deeper, larger concerns and conversations about growing inequality in America. So that begins with the healthcare system and doesn't even end there. There are people who've worked in the industry now who are also using this moment to speak out. A former executive writing in this New York Times piece that what he saw made him quit a long while back. That's Wendell Potter, who worked at Cigna in their corporate communications. Looking at this particular case, he says it's reinvigorated a conversation that they had about suppressing, basically, these very critiques in an industry that puts, quote, profits above patients. And much of the discussion that began with the sort of initial debate about, well, murder is wrong and murder is murder and killing someone in broad daylight is wrong, that piece of it, which goes to law and order and crime, quickly morphed into the larger conversation of, even if that is true, and hopefully most people in a civilized society still believe in that rule of law and against violence, but if you agree with that, then what happens when other people are taking actions that lead to avoidable loss of life? And you don't need to have the lawyerly sort of academic discussion about what you call it. Do you call that negligence? Do you call that manslaughter? It's certainly different than first-degree murder, but ethically, what do we do about that? And is that what we want? And is that acceptable with companies that already make a lot of money claiming they're going to provide you health coverage in the event that you need it, and when you need it most, they deny you? The rich are also getting richer against this backdrop. I want to show you just one headline. There are many out there, but when you look at the hoarding of wealth by a small group of people, Bloomberg, the financial outlet, notes that the world's 500 richest people are now holding $10 trillion in wealth this year. And if all boats were rising in this tide, you might have a different dynamic or reaction to that, even though that is an incredible amount of wealth hoarding that can't possibly be spent in those people's lifetimes and likely the lifetimes of their children. But when you look at this, the raw national data, which we have from the federal government, the median wage an American is making is just over $1,000 a week in the first quarter of 24, which doesn't get you very far, and that's before you run into unplanned health costs, which might be the thing that saves or doesn't save the life of you or your loved ones. Americans have very few options against rising inequality and a heck of a lot of understandable rage about the people at the top doing this. With all that said, I want to bring in the very person I quoted. Wendell Potter worked as a senior corporate executive in communications at Cigna. He wrote that op-ed for the Times, and he's written several books and been called upon long before this recent incident to discuss what is wrong with this healthcare industry, as well as how other healthcare reforms like Obamacare function. He leads the Lower Out-of-Pocket Now coalition. You might be the ideal guest for a non-ideal situation in America. Welcome.
Thank you, Ari. Good to be on your show.
Let's start with the point I raised, that if you put aside what I'm calling somewhat legal semantics, there has to be a regulatory, a societal, and an ethical obligation of these healthcare companies to provide the care they promise rather than deny it to people who played by the rules, paid in, and are facing life and death situations.
There should be, and there used to be. It's not been so many years ago that was kind of the way health insurance worked in this country. But in the mid-1990s, things changed. And back then or before then, most of us got our health insurance from nonprofit Blue Cross plans or other nonprofit organizations. Since then, the big companies that dominate the industry are New York Stock Exchange corporations, mega corporations that have really put profits over the needs of patients for many, many years now. And this is what happens when you allow Wall Street to run your system of health insurance. These companies have to show these investors and Wall Street financial analysts every 3 months that they're meeting those investors' profit expectations. And they do that in ways that make it more and more difficult for people to get the care that they need and to be able to afford that care, even if they have health insurance. That's why I lead that coalition, because one of the ways that they have been able to penalize us and make it so difficult for us to get the care that we need is making us pay tens of thousands of dollars in many cases for our care before our insurance policies will kick in these days.
Yeah. When you look at what they sometimes call medical ethics, there are situations that are difficult, but where doctors might land on the side of not providing a certain type of care. Someone who is 90 years old, terminal, and a very complex procedure may or may not add some months, and the doctors say no. And that still can be heart-wrenching and debatable. I want to be very clear, and a lot of people watching or living in America know this already, right? Although, Wendell, I don't know if you know, sometimes on the news we tell people things they already know. That's not the main issue here. The issue are situations where someone needs life-saving care. The doctors are ready to do it. And as you said, it's the Wall Street-driven corporation. So I want to read from an example you give where you write that this helped you decide to leave. 2008, a 17-year-old leukemia patient in California had a scheduled liver transplant. And then it was, you write, postponed at the last minute when Cigna told her surgeons that the company, Cigna, would not pay. And then you explain how these things go down. Her family stirred up so much media attention that Cigna relented. But it was too late. She died a few hours after Cigna's change of heart. Tell us about that and what it reveals, that the company is, according to that story, literally trying to see what it can get away with, including a situation that might result in the loss of life that otherwise is savable. But if there's too much heat, they back down, which raises the question, why couldn't they have done the thing they're supposed to do, provide the health coverage to begin with?
Yeah, what these companies do is they know that most people take a denial as the final answer, and that most people will not fight that denial. They will not pursue an appeal that they're entitled to. In this case, Natalie Sarkeesian's family did. Cigna still said no, so the company became the family became a very squeaky wheel, and it became a huge PR nightmare for Cigna, and the company eventually relented. This happens all the time when a case becomes something that the media takes an interest in. The insurance company in question will usually relent and reverse that denial because they want that PR problem to go away. But they just are counting on people not knowing how to even appeal a decision, even if it's life-threatening. And also keep in mind that most people, when you're sick, you just don't have the energy and sometimes the ability to advocate for yourself. And it can be a very complicated procedure because these companies purposely make it very difficult. Only about 10% or fewer people actually appeal these denials. When they do, the majority are approved. So that just goes to show you that medically necessary care is being denied day in and day out. And often it's deadly, as it was for Natalie Sarkeesian. It happens every single day. And it's only occasionally that a story captures the media's attention.
And Gotti, Bourbon Street is just reopened. It's a street where so many people, myself included, have really fond memories. How are people responding there?
Yeah, Bourbon Street is reopened, and right now, in the last 5 minutes or so, Canal Street next to Bourbon Street has reopened. I want to show you, this is where that truck came through, but you can see you've got a Bearcat, you've got the Department of Homeland Security staging some special operators over there. Then you've got some more traditional police forces down the way. This street is now blocked off by this massive truck. And then again, this is where the truck popped up on the curve and made it through. There's a little bit of a memorial right here. People are leaving beads and flowers for some of the victims. But right here, these are the barriers that they've put in. These barriers are temporary barriers. They were put in just a little while ago to prevent any type of vehicle from getting up there. There's also this removable barrier, a wedge barrier. They said that they didn't have those barriers in place because they sometimes would have mechanical problems and they wouldn't be able to get them down in time if an ambulance needed to come in here. So the wedge barriers, they talked about during some of these press conferences, but the idea of bollards. This used to be a place where bollards would go up. If you've been here at night, you know Bourbon Street closes down to cars, and it becomes, you know, the party central of the Big Easy. This is such an important part of New Orleans. Like, the community here is really the driving force behind so much of the tourism, and tourism is really what puts New Orleans on the map. I mean, this is a place where we've heard over and over again from some of the city leaders, we invented hospitality, and you see it when you walk down the street here. But the bollards used to be in place apparently because of Mardi Gras beads. They would get jammed in there, and it became very problematic to put them in, take them out, put them in, take them out. At least that's what officials were saying. That's one of the reasons why they didn't have those bollards in place. All of that obviously now is going to be taken under consideration going forward. There is talk about the possibility of just shutting down Bourbon Street, only opening it to pedestrians going forward. But again, all of that stuff is still pretty preliminary. But I want to show you, this is the first street where we're crossing. It's 3 streets down that truck made it down. So all the way down here, this is where, unfortunately, through the viewing of a lot of the videos that we've seen, some of them that we can't even show you because they're too graphic, the most of the fatalities happened here in between this street and between that street. At that point, the crowds seemed to have seen that there was a commotion coming down, and they were able to part. And so many miraculous moments of people jumping out of the way as that truck barreled down. Finally, that truck about 2 streets down, coming to a stop, and that's when the driver, the terrorist, emerged, and you had officers just running down as fast as they could, trying to get to that truck. Finally pulling up, they opened fire. The terrorist was killed right there. And the other thing that I don't think people understand about how chaotic the situation was. Again, it was 3:15 in the morning. There were hundreds, thousands of people out here, but so many of them were in the bars and the clubs. And so they hear this commotion. They all try to rush outside, and the police push them back in. And so there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that are stuck inside of clubs. The music is still playing. People know that there is this horrible tragedy that is outside, and yet they're unable to leave. They're stuck in this purgatory of just insanity inside with this music playing, terrified that something else might happen. And then finally they are allowed to be released once the scene was deemed clear. So just an absolute chaotic moment here on Bourbon Street. However, today is all about the New Orleans resilience that we see on display. A little bit earlier, there was this very moving procession. Some of the native-born sons of New Orleans, the musicians that have played and grew up here in the French Quarter, came out with their trumpets and with their horns, and they walked down with some clergy all the way down the street, almost blessing Bourbon Street, playing that music. One of them told me, you know, Louis Armstrong, to quote Louis Armstrong, music is the great healer. And to hear that sound once again here on Bourbon Street, it definitely sent shivers down your spine. And that is how this community wants to move on. They want to mourn the loss of the lives that were taken here on this street. And they know that the way to do that is to move forward as quickly as possible so that the terror doesn't win. Yamiche?
Yeah. And you think about New Orleans, a city that had to rebuild after Katrina, a city that had so many other issues when it comes to violence, when it comes to poverty, to see Bourbon Street reopening just this quickly and to see the resilience on display. As you said, this is a city, having been there a number of times, I can say people there really understand how to pick up and how to both mourn and show people grace and to definitely mark a sad moment, but how to also move on and push forward. So thank you so much, Gadi Schwartz, for that really incredible report walking down Bourbon Street as it reopens.
Okay, I have a question to start out this new year. If you were, say, a billionaire or a mega millionaire who owned major corporations that control everything from oil and agriculture to how Americans shop and what they drive, how we access health care, the devices we use, how we get information, the price of housing, food, and more, and you were using your massive wealth not necessarily to make life easier or more affordable for ordinary Americans, but rather to just make more money, how would you handle the inevitable backlash when average Americans figure out they're getting played and paying higher tax rates than you while earning a fraction of what your CEOs and stockholders rake in, and also paying more for literally everything? How would you keep the anger at bay, forestall a storm the Bastille revolution? Well, one thing you could do is build high walls to live behind, hire private security, and travel around in an armored car. That might keep you safe from the teeming masses. Kind of isolating, though. Or you could get millions of average Americans to take your side, root for you, and even fight harder for you and your wealth than they do for themselves. Get them to make your priorities their priorities. Maybe even get them to fight other non-rich people, immigrants and minorities, and anybody but you and your fellow billionaires. Okay, well, how would you do that? Because that would be one hell of a magic trick. Back in the 1980s, Rush Limbaugh became a radio powerhouse by enthralling mainly white working-class men, truck drivers, cops, and other non-college educated blue-collar types who spent their workdays in their cars or other places where they could tune in to AM radio for hours. AM radio network saw the potential profit in this and syndicated his show to hundreds of rural and small-town AM radio stations to pump the Limbaugh show for hours a day. So Rush Hudson Limbaugh III of the prominent and affluent Limbaughs of Girardeau, Missouri, could lean into his golden microphone and tell his audience of ditto heads, as he called them, that real Americans like them were having their pockets picked by the welfare queens, the brown immigrants, and the feminazis. They were the ones making white working-class men's lives worse. Not the Reagan Revolution, which ended pensions, gutted unions, and slashed away at Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs. No. It's the poor who are the problem, not the rich. He was so good as a broadcaster, one of the best ever in the business, frankly. He even helped radicalize Clarence Thomas, according to a documentary by PBS Frontline.
He would listen to Rush Limbaugh as he was doing a long commute, and he would have court staff tape record it so he could listen to it when he was commuting.
Limbaugh, who ultimately became a billionaire, fit the 80s and 90s perfectly. The lifestyles of the rich and famous era, when Americans practically worshipped the financially successful, even making a star out of pretend billionaires like failed real estate developer Donald Trump, who was born rich and promptly squandered his fortune on failed real estate deals before he was bailed out by banks and Russia, allegedly. Rush spawned a slew of copycats: Glenn Beck, Michael Savage, Mark Levin, Neil Bortz, Sean Hannity, and more, each of whom had the same general message: poor's bad, affirmative action bad, brown immigrants bad, feminism definitely bad. But the wealthy and oil companies and big business, good.
Charles Koch and David Koch have been outspoken advocates of the free market for over 50 years.
This should send a chill down the spines of everyone out there who's watching Fox now, because if you dare to question, you might not have the money of the Koch brothers to defend yourself.
Rush was followed by Roger Ailes, who went to work for billionaire Rupert Murdoch, building Fox News, which took his same message that white American voters should focus on crime No, not mass shootings, black crime, brown crime, sexual minorities that make them uncomfortable, and illegal immigrants. That's the problem, not billionaires like, say, Rupert Murdoch or the Koch brothers. They deserve the tax cuts and deregulation. We promise it will all trickle down. But we got to get rid of the welfare, affirmative action, equal opportunity, DEI, CRT, ABCDEFG. That's the real threat. And as long as you keep focusing on that, we are good. In the modern era, billionaires branched out from bankrolling talk radio and cable news to funding right-wing online ventures like Breitbart News, initially bankrolled by the billionaire Mercer family. There's also conservative organizations and think tanks active on college campuses like Turning Point USA, the Federalist Society, the Young America Foundation, and Americans for Prosperity, which was the Koch money-fueled pro-corporate backbone of the Tea Party movement, as well as up-and-coming podcasters like Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro, who offer a younger, slicker feel, but the same message. Poor's bad, brown immigrants bad, blacks and especially black history and affirmative action bad, DEI bad, Black Lives Matter bad, feminism bad, insurance companies, oil companies, drilling and rich people good. And while hating on immigration is a core part of the right-wing media ecosystem, these right-wing outlets have found a form of immigration they do like. Namely, the migration of rich foreign nationals with inherited wealth into the U.S., where they can buy up tech companies, gobble up small businesses into giant conglomerates and reduce competition and create monopolies, while building massive defense contractors that eat up taxpayer subsidies so their billionaire owners can buy up even more companies, lay off people, and traffic in stock buybacks. In the process, a small group of super wealthy families have gained breathtaking control over the courts, including the Supreme Court, thanks to Leonard Leo and the Heritage Foundation, and over politicians through the unlimited donations the Supreme Court cleared the way for in the Citizens United decision. They control what we eat, how we shop, and even how much we pay for housing, because the super rich own literally millions of acres of farmland and millions of units of housing through private equity firms, making them America's biggest landlords. They also increasingly control information, what Americans are allowed to know. Jeff Bezos doesn't just control a lot of what we buy via Amazon, he controls the Washington Post. Ditto the South African billionaire who owns the Los Angeles Times, who is even more aggressive about pushing a friendly, pro-rich point of view. And of course, there's Rupert Murdoch, the billionaire who controls probably the single most powerful disseminator of right-wing groupthink ever created, the aforementioned Fox News. This small group of families, the Mercers, the Kochs, the DeVosses, the Ulines, the Bradleys, the Wilks, and more, plus America's billionaires and mega corporations own so much. And you've probably never even heard of most of them, which is kind of great for them. And then there are the tech entrepreneurs like Peter Thiel, the born rich immigrant from South Africa who invested in PayPal, got even richer, and went into private equity, where he employed a Yale graduate who wrote a book dissing Appalachians, who changed his name to J.D. Vance. Thiel also controls a company called Palantir that helps the government surveil you, so yay. And there's Vivek Ramaswamy, the first-generation American son of Indian parents who took Soros money to start his first company, but reps a party that hates liberal billionaire George Soros. Vivek recently lectured Americans about our culture of mediocrity, ranting that a culture that celebrates the prom queen over the math Olympiad champ or the jock over the valedictorian will not produce the best engineers, a culture that venerates Corey from Boy Meets World or Zach and Slater over Screech in Saved by the Bell or Stefan over Steve Urkel in Family Matters will not produce the best engineers. Which is weird, because the culture he described produced the internet and Facebook. The Winklevoss twins and Mark Zuckerberg created the app after Zuck dropped out of Harvard, having basically digitized Harvard's freshman Facebook so men could find dates easier. Ramaswamy, who graduated from Harvard, once had a failed company to supposedly cure Alzheimer's. Here he is selling it on CNBC.
I actually think the potential opportunity here is really tremendous for delivering value to patients.
Yeah, that company failed. Though somehow, Vivek and his mom made a lot of money by cashing out. And did Vivek try to replicate Steve Urkel along the way? Nah. Here's Vivek mimicking a key aspect of the American culture he finds so terribly mediocre on the campaign trail. Yeah, lose yourself indeed. He also did that act as a college student at Harvard long before running to be president of this supposedly mediocre nation. And then there's Vivek's partner in the pretend agency to cut government spending, Elon Musk, who controls the app formerly known as Twitter and used it along with $200 million to put Trump back in office. He's now gotten Trump to come out wholeheartedly for visas for lower paid foreign workers to replace Americans in Silicon Valley jobs because, because he's the richest man in the world and Trump needs the money. And what value has Elon created? He was born rich in South Africa, came to America after apartheid fell, and he and his brother got $3 million to invest in their tech company called Zip2. Ever heard of it? Yeah, me neither. Also, his brother says they were working illegally in the U.S. at the time, which Musk disputes.
In fact, when they did fund us, they realized that we were illegal immigrants.
Well, I mean,
yes, we were.
I'd say it was a gray area.
Yeah, yes, we were. We were illegal immigrants.
It's a gray area. Yeah, okay. And while his superfans worship Elon like MAGAs worship Trump and used to worship Jesus, Elon didn't create Teslas or the technology behind them. Elon became the company's CEO. He invested in the company, became the CEO, and then he bought the company out, which was actually created by two American engineers from California, Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning, who probably grew up watching Saved by the Bell in the 90s. And those billionaires and multimillionaires of America who now control your government, mind the Bastille, now want to take away jobs from you and change the culture to benefit them even further. Unless, of course, the civil war inside MAGA world brings them down first. That's coming up.
So for more than a decade, Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Rader has published a compilation of charts for the New York Times, breaking down the most significant events of the previous 12 months in his annual Year in Charts opinion essay. This year, they touch on everything from the economy to immigration. And Steve joins us now with his first charts of the new year. Steve, so good to see you. So let's run through some of the top issues for 2024. Tell us about that first chart.
Sure, Jonathan. So obviously we had an election, we have a change of president, so it's a good time to compare the record of these two presidents, one outgoing and one actually incoming, but also, of course, a previous president. And so first, let's look at the sort of central measure of the economy's strength, which is GDP. And you can see that both Trump and Biden had pretty steady GDP. Trump, of course, did have COVID, but Biden is leaving Trump with a really strong economy. And in fact, even if you exclude the effects of COVID, Biden's performance in the GDP was really quite strong, over 2% growth, and we're going in with a big tailwind. Similarly, on jobs, Biden really has created a huge amount of jobs. He created over 7 million jobs, about 165,000 a month during his term, and actually more than Trump really, even before COVID, hurt him in the end. And so Biden was, in fact, a jobs president. Now, we all know inflation was a big issue in this campaign, and it's been a real sore spot for the Biden administration. We did have inflation getting up over 7%. A lot of that was COVID-related, but, of course, there were some policy things that maybe were not ideal. But inflation has come almost all the way down to the Fed's 2% target. So, again, Biden is leaving Trump with an inflation rate that is pretty low and gives Trump a lot of freedom of movement. And then finally, of course, Trump thinks the S&P is one of the best measures of success of a president. He watches it so closely. But in fact, interestingly enough, the S&P was up by almost identical amounts under Biden and Trump, 56%. So they both turned out to be great stock market presidents.
Yeah, and as we have said so often on the show, the strong economy that Donald Trump inherited, and now from Barack Obama, and now he's doing it again from Joe Biden, who did oversee a lot of growth. So, Steve, let's turn to your second chart where you highlight how the border and climate change were major issues in the year that was.
Yes, that's exactly right, of course, Jonathan. The border was not Biden's finest moment, frankly. You can see what happened here. And Trump is not wrong when he talks about how border crossings were quite low. They were running about 74,000 a month when he left office. And they, in fact, did shoot up. Some of it was some things Biden said and some ways that they put a moratorium, for example, on deportations. But in fact, we did get up here almost to 300,000 a month. But what maybe people don't entirely know is that border crossings have come back down almost to where they were under Trump. They're running at about 100,000 at the moment. So we went up the hill and we went down the hill, but unfortunately that was pretty costly to Biden during the election. Climate should have been a more important issue in people's minds. I wish it were, because the numbers are really frightening. You can see that at 2023, 2024, these are all the years of climate going back all the way to 1850. And this is and they're color coded. So these are the earlier periods, and it literally follows a consistent time frame. And then it takes this huge jump. 2024 actually was the warmest year in history. And, but both 2024 so far above anything we'd seen previously, and this really needs to be a major issue going forward.
Steve, what about AI usage? It boomed last year. I feel like I'm hearing about ChatGPT everywhere I go. Talk to us about those developments.
Yeah, you heard about it because it's really quite extraordinary. It's a new technology that has been adopted at a faster rate than any technology that we know about the adoption rate for. We obviously don't have data going all the way back to the invention of the typewriter or whatever. But when you look at recent technological innovations like the internet, like usage of computers, AI is outstripping them. 40% of Americans have used AI or are using AI now. And that is way up from what we saw with the internet and with computers. Where this is going, we'll see, but it is certainly an extraordinary change, and it really promises to revolutionize life in many ways for all Americans in terms of more information, better ability to work more efficiently, and things like that. And yes, I know people worry about jobs. There's never been a technological innovation in history that hasn't ended up creating more jobs than it cost, so I'm an optimist. The stock market, for different reasons, is also an optimist. These are the 7 stocks, they call them the Magnificent Seven, that drove a lot of that stock market performance in the past year that I referred to. NVIDIA, the chip designer, up 179%. And then other big beneficiaries, Meta, also known as Facebook, Amazon, Google, and so forth. And then we'll get to Tesla. And the S&P as a whole was up 27% last year. These stocks as a group were up 70%. Tesla is interesting for a different reason, because you can see it really didn't do much at all during the year, and then it shot up after the election. Elon Musk has been a huge beneficiary of Trump's win. The value of all of his holdings have gone up by a couple $100 billion, and Tesla being one of the most recent to shoot up like that.
All right. Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Rattner, thank you. We'll be looking for the fullest of those charts in the New York Times.